"You're nothing but a maid to us now, Nora." Those were Clara's words, my own sister, the girl I once carried on my hip when she cried for our mother. I stood there clutching the tray of dishes she'd ordered me to wash, my hands shaking, my chest burning. After everything I gave up for them, for her, for all of them, this was how they saw me. I know it sounds unbelievable, but let me take you back to the beginning, to the day I buried my parents and buried my dreams right alongside them. That's where my story really begins. Before we proceed, please, I have a favor to ask. Kindly like and subscribe to my channel to keep me inspired to share more stories. Also, drop a comment of where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story goes. I was 19 when my whole world collapsed. 1 month, I was still dreaming about becoming an architect, still sketching buildings in the corners of my notebooks, still thinking life was just beginning. The next month, I was standing in a cold hospital hallway, with 3 younger faces staring at me, waiting for me to tell them what would happen now. My father went first. A sudden heart attack that nobody saw coming. 1 minute he was laughing at the dinner table, the next he was gone. I thought nothing could hurt worse, until 2 weeks later my mother's car skidded on a wet road. The call came in the middle of the night. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone too. 2 deaths, back to back. My parents were both buried before I could even catch my breath. There was no rich uncle waiting to step in, no grandparents offering to take us in. Just me, barely 19, terrified, and staring at the crushing responsibility of 3 siblings who had no one else. The social workers told me it was too much. They whispered that I should let them go into foster care. "You're too young," they said. "This isn't your burden." But every time I looked at my siblings, I knew the truth. They were my burden, whether I liked it or not. Mateo was 14 then. He tried to act tough, but I could see the fear hiding in his eyes. He was angry at the world, angry at losing our parents, but what he needed most was someone he could count on not to leave. Clara was just 11. She cried herself to sleep most nights, begged to keep the lights on, and slipped her hand into mine whenever she thought I might walk away. She was still a child, still fragile enough to ask me in a trembling voice, "Are we going to be okay?" And then there was Luis, only 6 years old, my baby brother who dragged our mother's scarf everywhere like it was some kind of shield. At night, he tucked it under his pillow and clung to it like he was clinging to her. Sometimes when he was half asleep, he called me Mama by accident. Every time he did, my chest cracked open a little more, so I signed the papers. Custody forms filled with words I didn't fully understand. I dropped out of college even though I had just been accepted into a program I had worked years for. I packed away my sketchbooks and told myself I'd come back to them someday. But someday never came. I sold my mother's jewelry to cover the first round of bills. Then I found 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and working at a diner during the day. I told myself it was temporary, just until we got back on our feet. But temporary turned into years. Instead of drafting blueprints, I was folding laundry. Instead of late-night study sessions, I was packing school lunches. Instead of chasing dreams, I was chasing overdue bills. Every month, the electricity bill stared at me like a monster. I prayed it would be low enough to pay. Some nights, I ate nothing so the kids could have more. They never noticed when I skipped meals. They just thought I wasn't hungry. My shoes wore thin. My clothes stayed the same for years. I worked until my hands ached, until my back gave out, until sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. And through it all, I smiled. I smiled for Mateo when I scraped together enough money for his soccer fees. I smiled for Clara when she needed someone to braid her hair before school. I smiled for Luis when he crawled into my bed after a nightmare. They were my reason, my purpose, my anchor. But if I'm being honest, there were nights I sat on the bathroom floor with the lights off, and I wondered if I had made a mistake. I wondered if giving up my dreams would ever be worth it. I wondered if anyone would remember the girl I used to be, the one who wanted to build something of her own, not just hold together what was left behind. Still, every morning I got up. I put on my uniform. I cooked breakfast. I held everything together with both hands, even when it felt like I was crumbling inside. Because the truth was simple. I didn't live for myself anymore. I lived for them. At first, they were grateful. I can still remember the way Mateo hugged me so tight the day I managed to pay for his soccer fees. His smile stretched across his face, and for a brief second, I felt like maybe I was doing something right. Like maybe all those sleepless nights and aching feet meant something. Clara, sweet Clara, used to slide little handmade cards under my door. Crooked hearts drawn in crayon, shaky words saying things like, "You're the best sister ever." I kept those cards tucked in an old shoebox, hidden under my bed. Sometimes I'd take them out and read them when I felt like I was drowning. And Luis followed me everywhere. My little shadow. He clung to my arm when I cooked, trailed behind me when I cleaned, and more than once he called me Mama without even realizing it. The first time he did it, I broke down crying in the laundry room where no one could see. But here's the thing about gratitude, it fades. When you do too much for too long, it stops looking like sacrifice. It starts to look like routine, normal, expected. By the time I reached my late 20s, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. I wasn't just tired, I was hollow. I worked myself to the bone so they could have everything I never did: new clothes, school trips, private tutors. I gave them chances I could only dream of. But when I skipped meals to make sure there was enough food for them, they didn't notice. When I collapsed into bed at odd hours, they didn't see a woman breaking under the weight of responsibility. They just thought I was lazy. I remember one night I came home from the diner after a 14-hour shift. My legs felt like cement. My hands were raw from scrubbing dishes. All I wanted was to close my eyes for 5 minutes. Mateo, who was 16 by then, looked at me sprawled on the couch and said, "You sleep too much." He said it with annoyance, not concern, and it cut deeper than he knew. I missed so much because of them. Birthdays of friends, reunions with classmates, the kind of moments other people my age lived for. I couldn't afford to show up to life. I was too busy keeping theirs together. And love? Love didn't stand a chance. Every time someone tried to get close, it ended the same way. At first, they admired my strength. They said things like, "You're incredible, Nora. You've sacrificed so much." But eventually the truth came out. They didn't want to share me with 3 siblings who sucked up every ounce of my attention. One man, I thought he was different, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll never have space for me. You're already married to their problems." And he was right. I slammed the door on love because no one stayed. Still, I kept going. Every morning I dragged myself out of bed, even when my body screamed to stop. I cooked, I cleaned, I worked, I saved. I told myself it was worth it, that one day, when they were older, when they finally understood, they would look back and realize what it cost me. That one day they would say, "We couldn't have made it without you, Nora." That thought was my lifeline, the belief that someday I'd be free again, that I could pick up the pieces of the life I abandoned at 19. Maybe I'd go back to school, maybe I'd travel, maybe, just maybe, I'd get a chance to dream again. But deep down there was always a voice whispering, "What if that day never comes?" Sometimes I caught it in the way Mateo sighed when I asked him to wash his own plate, or in the way Clara rolled her eyes when I reminded her of curfew, or in how Luis, once my little shadow, started slamming doors and calling me Naggy. It scared me, because I had given up everything for them. My youth, my dreams, my love life, my sanity. And if they didn't see it, if they didn't care, what would I have left? What would all those sacrifices mean if the very people I bled for grew up and forgot the cost? I told myself not to think like that. I told myself love couldn't just disappear. But at night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I had built my entire life on a lie. If I had burned myself to ashes, for nothing. And the thought that haunted me most was this: what if the ones I raised turned out to be the ones who broke me the hardest? Because life doesn't hand out thank you notes. I learned that the hard way. By the time Mateo turned 25, he had landed a high-paying job in finance. Expensive suits, shiny shoes, a car that cost more than everything I had ever owned combined. I thought I'd feel proud watching him walk into offices I once dreamed of working in. I thought he might look back and say, "This is because of you, Nora." Instead, he started looking at me differently. Not as the sister who raised him. Not as the girl who went hungry so he could eat. As staff. "Can you iron my shirt?" The maid forgot, he'd say casually, tossing his jacket at me before heading upstairs to take a phone call. He never noticed the dark circles under my eyes. He never asked if I had eaten. He never even thought that maybe, just maybe, I had my own work, my own life, my own exhaustion. To him, I was just there. Background noise. And Clara. Sweet, delicate Clara, the one who once wrote me cards in crayon and slipped them under my door. She became unrecognizable. Married into money, living in a house that smelled like roses and polished marble. She stopped introducing me as her sister. Instead, she'd wave her hand lazily and say things like, "Oh, that's Nora. She helps me with the house sometimes." Helps with the house. Her friends, women dripping in diamonds, would give me polite smiles, the kind you give to someone beneath you. And Clara, my Clara, would wrinkle her nose and laugh. Poor thing never got far in life, but at least she's useful. Useful. That word stung more than I could say. It reduced everything I had ever done, every sleepless night, every broken dream, to a job title I never applied for. And then there was Luis. Luis, who once followed me everywhere. Who once clung to my arm like I was his safe place. Who once called me mama without realizing it. He became the cruelest of all. At 21, with his tech salary and arrogance dripping from every word, he mocked me openly. He didn't even bother to hide it. "You're almost 40 and still have nothing," he sneered one night. "No house, no husband, no career. What a waste, a waste." The words sliced me open. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to remind him of the nights I went without food so he could eat. The mornings I walked him to school when I could barely stand. The days I patched up his scraped knees while hiding my own wounds. But I didn't. I swallowed it, just like I had swallowed everything else for years. Because how do you argue with the people you gave everything for when they've already decided you're nothing? I wasn't just ignored anymore. I was insulted, degraded, treated like a servant in the very family I had destroyed myself to hold together. There were moments, small ones, that broke me in ways I didn't admit out loud. Like the time Mateo handed me cash, not as a gift, but as if he was paying a worker. He didn't even look me in the eye, just shoved it in my hand and said, "Get groceries." Or the afternoon Clara asked me not to speak too much at her dinner party. "You don't really fit in with my friends," she whispered, as if I were something to be ashamed of. Or the night Luis told a group of his buddies that I was basically a live-in maid, and they all laughed. I stood there smiling like it didn't matter, but inside I was collapsing. I had burned myself to ashes to keep them warm, and now all they could do was mock the smoke. Sometimes I sat alone in my room and stared at my hands. Hands that had once held so much hope. Hands that had scribbled drawings of buildings I never got to design. Hands that cooked, cleaned, worked, bled, so they could stand tall. And now, those same hands were invisible. The love I gave them became a chain they tied around my neck. And I started to wonder, was this what my parents would have wanted for me? Would they have wanted me to give up everything, only to be treated like less than nothing? The worst part wasn't the words. It wasn't the insults or the way they looked down on me. The worst part was the silence. The silence when I hoped they might say thank you. The silence when I longed for a little recognition. The silence that made me realize they had rewritten our story in their minds. In their version, I wasn't the sister who raised them. I was just there, background, invisible. And every day that passed, I felt myself shrinking. But here's the thing about being pushed down. Eventually, you hit the ground. And when you do, you only have two choices: stay there or rise. And I didn't know it then, but the day was coming when all three of them would learn what happens when the woman they stepped on finally stands back up. It all came to a head one evening at Clara's house, a family dinner. Clara had set the table with her fine china, the kind she liked to brag about. Crystal glasses, folded napkins, candles that smelled like something expensive and foreign. Everything looked perfect, like a magazine picture. Except I was the one who had cooked. Of course I was. No one else had lifted a finger. Not Mateo, who was still on his phone, sending emails between bites. Not Clara, who had spent the whole afternoon picking out her dress. Not Luis, who came late, laughing too loudly, as if life had never been cruel to him. No, it was me. Always me. And I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself, at least they're together, at least I can still give them something. But halfway through the meal, it happened. Luis set down his fork with a dramatic sigh. "This is too salty," he complained, pushing his plate away like a spoiled child. My stomach dropped. Before I could even answer, Clara rolled her eyes, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Honestly, Nora, cooking is the least you could do. After all, we supported you all these years." Supported me. The words rang in my ears like church bells. Loud, mocking, wrong. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. My chest tightened, and I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to laugh and say she was joking. But her face was calm, her eyes cold. She meant it. Supported me? Mateo leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks, and nodded like a judge handing down a sentence. "She's right. You're lucky we let you stay around. Most people would have moved on from what are you now, a cleaner, a failed dropout? Failed dropout. Lucky." The words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last. My hands began to tremble, not with fear this time, but with rage. A hot burning rage that rose from my stomach all the way to my throat. For 2 decades I had bitten my tongue. For 2 decades I had swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every ungrateful glance. But not tonight. I dropped my fork. The sound was sharp against the polished table. All 3 of them looked up at me in surprise. My chair scraped back as I stood, my legs unsteady, but my voice finally found its strength. "I gave up my future for you," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "Every dream I ever had, I buried it so you could live yours. And this," my chest rose and fell as I pointed at them, "this is how you repay me?" Silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest, that makes it hard to breathe. They just stared at me, like I was the problem, like I was ungrateful. Then Luis smirked. That smirk, the same one he wore when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. "Stop being dramatic," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You chose this. Nobody asked you. Nobody asked me." The words were gasoline on the fire already tearing through me, because maybe he was right. Maybe nobody had asked me. But I was a child too, once. I didn't choose to become their parent. I didn't choose to give up school, to trade dreams for dirty dishes and late-night shifts. I did it because if I didn't, who would have? But they didn't see that. They never had. My throat ached, my eyes burned, and suddenly the walls of that perfect dining room felt like they were closing in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sit there another second, not with their cold stares and cruel words pressing down on me. So I walked out. I left the half-eaten plates, the candlelight, the laughter that quickly resumed behind me as if my absence meant nothing. I left before they could see me break. Out into the night, where the air was cold and sharp and full of freedom I hadn't tasted in years. Tears stung my eyes, hot and relentless, streaming down my cheeks as I stumbled down the street. I thought of all the years I had lost, all the love I had given, all the ways I had been erased, and for the first time in years I didn't think about them. I thought of myself, the girl I used to be, the one with bright eyes and wild dreams, the girl who had wanted to travel, to build, to love, to live. She wasn't dead. She was buried, and maybe, just maybe, tonight was the night she clawed her way back up. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, my heart pounding. Somewhere deep inside me, something whispered, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." And none of them, Mateo, Clara, Luis, had any idea what was coming. Pain can either break you or build you. For me, it did both. That night after the dinner, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my pillow wet with tears. My chest still hurt from their words, but underneath the pain was something else, something sharper, resolve. If my siblings thought I was nothing, I would prove them wrong. Not for their sake, not so they would clap for me, but for myself, for the girl I used to be, the one I had buried under years of sacrifice. The very next morning, I pulled an old box from the back of my closet. Dust clung to it, like it hadn't been touched in centuries. Inside were my sketchbooks, the ones I hadn't opened since I was 19. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them. Pages filled with buildings I had once dreamed of designing. Skyscrapers shaped like glass ribbons, homes carved into hillsides, bridges arching like poetry. I remembered how it used to feel when a pencil in my hand could create worlds. For the first time in decades, I let myself cry not from pain, but from remembering who I was. It was too late for college, too late for the perfect path I once wanted, but I had survived too much to be afraid of too late. I started small. At night, when the house was quiet, I searched online for courses. Architecture, design, project management. I read articles until my eyes burned. I scribbled notes like a starving woman devouring crumbs. I reached out to strangers in online forums, asking questions, sharing ideas. Some ignored me, some helped. I didn't care. Every tiny step felt like oxygen-filling lungs I thought had collapsed long ago. My first job came from pure luck. A cafe owner needed help redesigning his space. A friend of a friend gave him my name. I charged almost nothing, terrified I wasn't good enough. But when the project finished, people noticed. Customers stopped to admire it. His sales doubled. He told everyone about me. One job became 2, 2 became 10, 10 became 50. I worked day and night, fueled not by desperation anymore, but by hunger. Hunger to reclaim the years I had lost. Hunger to finally be more than the shadow my siblings had forced me into. Within a few years, I wasn't just Nora, the cleaner. I was Nora Castillo, founder of Castillo Designs. I signed contracts worth more than I had ever dreamed of. My work appeared in magazines. Journalists wrote about me. Awards began to follow, and with success came transformation. I bought myself clothes that fit the woman I had become, tailored, elegant, powerful. I walked into rooms and people turned. My voice no longer shook when I spoke. My back was straight, my chin lifted. The tired woman my siblings mocked was gone. I was back. But success wasn't just about money or fame. It was about healing the broken pieces of myself. Every blueprint I drew, every building that rose from my designs, felt like stitching together the girl I used to be with the woman I had become. And still, deep down, I carried their words. The insults, the laughter, the way they had erased me. I carried it like a scar. Not because I wanted to, but because it reminded me never to forget. Never again would I let anyone treat me like nothing. Years later, when I stood in my own office, glass walls, city skyline stretching before me, I smiled. Not for the world, not for clients, not even for revenge. I smiled for the 19-year-old girl who thought her life had ended, for the young woman who had folded laundry in tears, who had eaten scraps so her siblings could eat full meals. She had survived. I had survived. And though my siblings didn't know it yet, the power had shifted. The sister they once treated like a maid was now someone they couldn't ignore. Someone they would have to face again, whether they liked it or not. Because fate has a way of circling back. And when it did, I promised myself, I wouldn't be the same woman they left behind. I would be the storm they never saw coming. They didn't notice me at first. My siblings were too busy living their lives. Too busy taking me for granted. In their world, I was still the woman in the background, the one who cooked their meals, ironed their clothes, and disappeared when the guests arrived. But the day came when they did notice. It was at a gala, a fundraiser for architecture and design. My firm had been asked to sponsor, and I was the guest of honor. I walked into that ballroom wearing a gown that shimmered like liquid silver, my hair swept up, my makeup flawless. Cameras flashed the moment I stepped out of the car. Reporters rushed toward me, their voices overlapping. "Nora, over here, smile for the press." Nora Castillo, the woman changing the face of modern architecture. And there they were, Mateo, Clara, Luis. Their jaws nearly hit the floor when they realized the woman everyone was fawning over, the one standing under the lights, signing autographs, shaking hands with politicians and CEOs, was their sister. The sister they had mocked, the sister they had belittled, the sister they had buried under insults and chores. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. A smile that said, yes, I remember everything. From that day on, the tables turned. Mateo was the first to come crawling. His big finance job had crumbled after a string of bad investments. His house was on the verge of foreclosure, his fancy suits gone threadbare. One evening, he showed up at my office. He didn't even try to pretend. Nora, I need a loan, just enough to get back on my feet. I looked at him the way he once looked at me, like he was a burden, but I didn't raise my voice, I didn't insult him. Instead, I slid a check across the desk. Not enough to save his empire, just enough to keep him afloat. He swallowed his pride as he took it, and I could see it in his eyes, the memory of every time he had called me a failure. Now his survival depended on me. Then came Clara. Her marriage, the one she used to flaunt in front of me, had shattered. Her wealthy husband left her for someone younger, prettier, less bitter. She arrived at my door with a suitcase, mascara streaked down her face. I need a place to stay. Just for a while, she whispered. The same woman who once refused to introduce me as her sister. The one who laughed about me being useful. I let her in. But not into my home. I arranged for her to stay in one of my company apartments, small, modest, nothing like the mansion she had lived in. Every night she slept there, she remembered. The roof over her head came from me. And then Luis. Arrogant Luis, the one who once mocked me for being almost 40 and having nothing. He'd been fired from his tech job, blacklisted in the industry after a scandal. One afternoon, he called me, his voice tight with desperation. Nora, you have connections. Could you put in a word for me? I almost laughed. The boy who once told me I was worthless now begged me to open doors for him. I didn't slam the door. I gave him names, numbers, small opportunities. Enough to make him work, enough to keep him humbled. That was the beauty of my revenge. I didn't scream, I didn't curse, I didn't treat them the way they had treated me. I simply stood in my power, silent and unshakable. Because silence, I learned, can be louder than any insult. Every request they made, I made them earn. They scrubbed their pride raw with every favor they asked, and with each one, they remembered. They remembered the nights I skipped meals so they could eat. They remembered the years I gave up my dreams so theirs could bloom. They remembered the insults, the laughter, the way they had pushed me down, only to look up now and find me standing above them. They had stabbed me in the back, but I had risen higher than they ever imagined. And now, every time they looked at me, they were forced to face the truth. They owed me everything, and I would never let them forget it. Nora's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about sacrifice, resilience, and rebirth. How many of us have given everything to the people we love, only to be forgotten, dismissed, or treated like we were nothing? How many of us have buried our dreams, telling ourselves it was worth it, even when no one ever said thank you? That's why Nora's journey cuts so deep. Because it's not just her story, it's ours too. And her revenge? It wasn't about cruelty. It wasn't about hurting back. It was about rising so high that the same people who once looked down on her could do nothing but look up. That is true power. If Nora's story touched you, if you saw even a piece of yourself in her struggle or her triumph, then don't let it end here. Hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and share your thoughts in the comments, because someone out there needs to hear your story too. Remember, sacrifice may break you, but it can also build you. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you could never be.